You Can Become a Hero by Orphaned Account on AO3. Episode 17. Chapter 14. A Talk That Couldn't Be Delayed. The next time Dabi entered the apartment again, he looked much different. All his piercings had been removed the moment he left. His graphite had healed over, and were more placed along his arms and legs. In the meantime, he had been stuck in the hospital, tossed between therapists and surgical specialists like a football. All contact was cut off between him and the other heroes during his recovery period. He hadn't spoken to Enji since that night, and he had no idea what happened as Hawks and Enji retrieved the bombs hidden in the building. He didn't want to think of the look on Hawks' face after securing the explosives. He especially didn't want to linger on what happened when Hawks came home at the end of the day. He must have been happy to have his apartment all to himself once more. Dabi closed his eyes tightly, leaning forward until his head hits his knees. He was sitting alone in the common area of the hospital, where he spent a decent amount of his time. It was early in the morning, and lots of the other patients were attending group therapy. However, he skipped out to sit in the sunlight, allowing himself to seek comfort in its warmth. It took a while to come around to it, but it felt nice to be out in the daytime. After he was off the risk category of patients, he was given permission to go outside once a day, weather permitted. He wasn't the type to be a nature freak, but being near the woods was peaceful. In the city, everyone looked at him. Everyone stared. But not even the birds would chirp his way to absorb in the beauty surrounding him. The other patients didn't appreciate the view as much as he did, but he was able to accept the fact that they were all in the same shoes here. Each was sent to the hospital due to a break or some attempt on their life. He felt pathetic and selfish, whether he sat outside. He never felt so comfortable in his own skin, as if he wasn't some deformed freak, as if the grafts covered everything. And yet, he found himself wanting more. The sun can only give him so much comfort, when all he longed for was someone curled up beside him, their wings awkwardly positioned against his arms as they laughed in that cute way. Somewhere in between a short and a chip, something that made their feathers twitch down their wings. Dabi skipped the group therapy that day. That was because he'd been checked out in an hour. His backpack was already packed and sitting at his feet as the clock clicked loudly. He didn't know who was coming to pick him up at this point. Due to reasons, only his designated family could contact him while he was in the hospital. If they chose and got his consent, they could have added Hawks to the list of people who could call, or he could call. It would have been nice to hear his voice after so long, but when Fuyumi called him the second day he was admitted, he wasn't thinking that way. No, don't add him to the list. He didn't want to be rejected on the phone. Not when he was crumbling like this. Are you sure? Fuyumi asked, concern dripping into her tone. He really wants to talk to you. I know. The rest of the conversation was cut short by Dabi running out of his minutes quota. He was allowed 15 minutes of time a day, but that line was mostly quiet. He didn't call anyone, but instead waited to see who would call. There had been 2 times he was called to the front desk to speak to Enji. Luckily, he managed to convince the receptionist to tell the hero that he was busy in therapy session or healing after some of their procedures. Fuyumi called a total of 4 times, 1 for every week he had been holed up in the hospital. Shoto called once, but only stayed on the line for 2 minutes, just enough to tell Toya to take care and to talk to him when he was back in commission. Natsuo called 3 times, but each was with Rei on the other line as well. Toya? He glanced up to see the receptionist staring at him. Someone is here to pick you up. You will be escorted to the lobby. Do you have everything you need? I have everything. Dabi stood up, putting his backpack on. He headed to the door, where a small nurse waited for him. She was a foot shorter than him, but still had an aura around her that screamed seriousness. He tucked his head down as he began to walk down the corridors, staying behind her as much as possible. His shoulders curled forward in an attempt to shrink himself down. He tried to calm his breathing as they neared the front door. It was time to face Hawks or Engie, whoever came to visit. He hoped it would be Engie over his partner. But he knew deep down that it would be better to get things over with right away. Once he got to the lobby, he raised his head just in time to see someone walking towards him with a gentle smile. It was Rei. Behind her was Fuyumi, who gave him a little wave. He was about to return the gesture, but was pulled into a hug by his mother.
Toya, how are you feeling, sweetie?
I'm feeling better, Mom. Toya whispered, hugging her back. The cold touch of her skin was so familiar.
We already got the information on the medication you are taking.
Fuyumi cut in once Rei pulled away.
So we have it in the car. We could stop and get something to eat if you want, but then we could head home.
Toya tensed at the thought of what come home could entail. But since he wasn't already arrested for what he was attempting to do, he doubted it meant a jail cell. It very well may mean a birdcage. I want to come home. So, Toya headed to Fuyumi's car, taking a seat in the back with Rei. She carried her hands through his hair, cooling over how nice it was to see him again and asking him about his experience. It was comforting to have her there, especially since she had been in a mental ward for a portion of her life. Even though Toya's stay wasn't that long compared to the years she held there, it was relieving that someone shared his weird experiences. Fuyumi asked a couple questions during the trip back, but nothing too personal. It wasn't like all the information Toya was spewing wasn't detailed enough anyways, especially when it came about asking about the pain he felt and the operations. It's been better. It isn't a constant ache. It's... Toya looked at the ceiling of the car, feeling better, not looking out to the world, rushing by. With the grafts acting as real skin, it feels better. It doesn't hurt to stretch or move. I mean, the graphites are weird, but not bad.
Glad to hear that.
Rei hummed, reaching over to gently run her fingers over the scars that crept around the back of Toya's hand. They looked almost natural with the grifes laying over it.
It looks nice. I'm happy it doesn't hurt. I was worried.
Thanks. Toya replied, flexing his hand. Almost like the old days. Well, as close as I'm getting. Speaking of the old days, they soon pulled to the Todoroki residency. Guilt formed in his gut as he figured out their destination, but he knew he needed to join back into society slowly. One where he wasn't constantly surveillanced. One where he didn't have to promise to not hurt himself while being handed a plastic knife. Then again, if he got into contact with the League once more, he didn't know if he could hold back. It was his roots. Most of all he'd known that wasn't abuse and neglect. Even with Hawks and Engie's intervention, it wasn't enough to flip him to the good side. Would a month of healing and meditation be enough for that shit? A month and onwards of taking pills?
Do you need anything? Or do you want rest? Need something to eat? Need a phone to call anyone?
He hated her tone and her voice at the end, and he hated how fast he shook his head. I want to rest and sit out in the garden. Once Toya unpacked, he did as he said he would. The garden wasn't big, but it was fenced in, something Toya appreciated. While he was finally convinced himself that he could be viewed by the day sun and not be abandoned by nature due to his deformed appearance, he wasn't ready to be seen by anyone. He always hated being stared at. But now that he was more graphite than Burns, he didn't want to see how the public would respond. The garden had a small walkway with a stone bench overseeing a koi pond. Pink and yellow flowers spread across the path, but it was almost beautiful. The flowers were lilies floating in the pond. Frogs and enormous koi swam in harmony, not as they all disturbed at the sight of Toya looming over them, staring in wonder as they moved. If he was still allowed to stick on the hero path, he'd want to buy a small house in the country when he retired, after he paid back Hawks for all the inconveniences he had caused. A frown settled on his lip at the thought. He dropped a hand to the water, swirling his fingers through the water. A small koi attempted to nib at his nail, only to get annoyed when it couldn't eat it. I can get you some food. Toya offered the fish, though he didn't get a response. I don't know where it is, but just hanging tight. You stay there, a voice called, making Toya's heart leap in his throat. I'll grab it. Toya didn't move, staring into the pond as someone came to sit beside him. A large hand handed over a canister. Toya carefully took it in his. He opened the lid and took out just a pinch, dropping it all in one spot in the pond. In seconds, the fish frenzy, and they began fighting over the scraps. Don't stop at that, Angie said, gesturing to the pond. Don't be shy. They wouldn't mind being a little overfed if you pour too much in. So Toya took a couple scoops out and spread a line across the water, watching as the fish took a bite. His father observed them as well, nodding his head as they ate every last piece. It was quiet as Toya spread a little less food over the water. But Enji spoke once more when it all disappeared, albeit slower this time. Some people can't let go of the hatred they feel inside. Enji shifted into spot beside Toya. They can't let go of the pain from the past or accept they lost. Many people say it's okay to keep that hatred, but is it really just a burden? A suitcase you have to carry with you? Proof of what people have done to turn you into a cold and heartless callous. It's become a part of you, something that grows so much that it seems almost like it was always there. That hatred is still inside of me, Toya murmured unhelpfully, and it can't go away. That's why I left. That's why everything happened. You avoided getting into that hatred. Avoided Dabi. Toya wanted to correct it, as it was his truth. However, he wasn't sure Enji was ready to hear out that special. And that is why you are here today. Bombs, flames, hatred. They are killers. They kill the mind and heart, but they also bring about destruction. So it's a good thing those things didn't go off. The bombs. Enji leaned back, looking at the sky. He took a deep breath. That would have been catastrophe. I take full fault for that incident, though. I don't blame you. Toya glanced to look at Enji's scarred face, his eyes meeting blue ones much like his own. What do you mean? I could have killed people. What I did was inexcusable. As far as I'm concerned, you played with bombs like a child. Toya looked down to the pond and poured a few flakes out into the pond's surface. That means it is the parents' responsibility. If it was months ago, Dabi would have scoffed at that statement. However, he remained silent as Toya closed his eyes. There wasn't a pull on his eyelids from scars. It was like the old days, except his father sat beside him, feeding the fish. He wasn't littered with proof from harsh training sessions or was mourning his missing mother figure. He was at peace, and his father was beside him, right to his side. I let that hate consume me too. Enji sighed. I wanted to become stronger, and I wanted my family to become stronger. It was to protect us, and to give us a good life. But my greed for power overwhelmed all my past ideals in a heartbeat. It hurt our family, tore the community you built to shreds. Toya could feel his hands begin to tremble. He didn't know why. But seeing you as a hero... Enji paused, clasping his hands before him. It was thunderous, as was everything with the large man, and the noise startled the koi into hiding beneath the booming lilies. When I saw you in that jail cell, I had one thought pass my mind. I believed you were good. That you, with proper guidance from heroes, better than myself, that you could be an excellent hero. No. That you could be a better man than I ever was. That I am, if given the chance. Lousy judgment. Toya chuckled, besides the way his voice cracked. His hand raised to wipe his eyes. Seeing how everything happened, it was a bad call on your part. I regret only the fact I hadn't seen your potential before. Angie replied quietly, and that I was too blind to see it, even after everything that had happened. You hadn't changed. You're still a great older brother, son. You put others before yourself and are willing to throw away everything you've done and build up from scratch as a hero. I couldn't be prouder of you. Toya never liked being outside with the scars. He hated that look he received from the streets, the constant judgment. But nature didn't judge, and it didn't mind when Toya began to tear up, hiccuping up a storm as he tried to prevent the oncoming waterworks. All continued as normal. The koi swims slowly around after seeing the coast was clear. Birds chirped from the treetops, and the frogs croaked to each other. And Toya cried as his father patted his back, fighting off his own emotions in order to be present with his son in the garden.
Okay, all right. So, I have no words other than I actually quite enjoyed this chapter. I wish. Oh, next chapter is called it's 15. It's called Toya and Hawks, and the summary literally is just Toya talks to Hawks. So I do love that Hawks got professional help that he needed, because sometimes it is truly a need, not a want, you know. Oh, I just realized what we just watched. We just watched me get absolutely rejected by Elliot in Stardew Valley, the gameplay. And I went into a corner and sobbed myself to sleep. Yep. That is what happened. Anyways, that's what Hawks is worried about. Not Hawks, Toya. I feel though, as Hawks would not reject Toya, I feel like Hawks in himself would feel maybe like at first a little disappointed, but then would feel happy for Toya. I mean, if it was me, I'm gonna be honest, if it was me, knowing all I know about psychology and stuff like that, would watch me just absolutely lose it because Elliot is dancing with someone else and not me. Anyways, but as someone who knows psychology and healing and what it takes to heal and all that jazz, healing is not linear. It's never linear. It's why alcoholics relapse. It's why people who have drug addictions relapse. It's why people who have, addictions relapse. Because healing is not linear. Someone who has dealt with something like that, self-harm specifically, it's not linear. You fall multiple times. It was really hard to get where I am today. And I still run the risk of one day relapsing. Because that's the thing. Even when you think you're fully healed, you're not fully healed, especially when it comes to something like this. And in Dabi's point, this is hatred and that has been viewing since what? 9, 10? How old was he when he started being so, like when he ran away? Let's say best case scenario, he was 11. He's what, 20 something now? He has spent all his very critical development years resenting someone, feeding this mind of resentment and needing to get revenge, and that nothing else matters but revenge. Of course, that is going to take forever to heal from. And of course, you are going to have relapses. And in Dabi's point, Toya's case, he had a really major relapse. But here's the thing. Before he fully relapsed, because the simple fact that he was thinking of doing that was the relapse. Before he relapsed, though, he stopped it. And that's what's important. He stopped himself from fully going back there, right? And obviously we could say that he has had many relapses. The panic attacks that he has, the fighting he had with, Hawks, all those little stuff, those are relapses. His hatred for Endeavor fully coming full force again, that's another relapse, right? So personally, me, if I was Hawks,
I would be disappointed, but understanding. And I would be there. Because I understand that healing is not so black and white. And healing is not linear. And love does not cure all. And a simple couple of weeks of being in a good place mentally, in a good place situationally, does not mean it's going to erase all your trauma. Because I understand the psychology behind it. And I understand that not only did Toya spend all his environmental years, building up this code. I mean, trying to uncode something from your mind is already difficult as it is. But trying to uncode something that was in your critical moments, that's even harder. And do not even get me started on the fact that healing in itself is already hard as it is. Add on top of, these other stuff, add on top of the fact that healing process is taking steps backwards sometimes. I'm not saying that you're supposed to take steps backwards. I'm not saying you're supposed to relapse when you're, healing. That you're supposed to go back to how it used to be, that you're supposed to take steps backwards. I'm saying that it's okay that you take steps backwards. I'm obviously not people who are, recovering from addictions. I'm not saying relapse because it happens all the time when healing. No. I'm saying prevent it as much as you can. But when it happens, know that it is normal and that it is okay and that you need to pick yourself back up. You have not failed completely. Healing is not linear. You take step backwards, but what really matters is not that you took a step backwards, is that you're then taking step forwards. It does not matter that you take 3 steps sideways. It matters that you then put in the effort to take 1 step forward. You could put 5 steps backwards, but you put 1 step forward and you are already better than how you were before. Because you're trying, and that's what matters. That got emotional real quick. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.